There are people who believe Ferrari is just a car company. They're wrong. Ferrari is a monument built on top of a grave, and the man buried beneath it never wanted the monument at all. His name was Dino Ferrari. He died at 24. His father, Enzo Ferrari, turned that death into a brand. The Dino 246. The V6 engine. The entry-level dream machine that made Ferrari accessible to the merely wealthy, not just the obsessively rich. It sold beautifully. It still does. But here's what nobody tells you: Dino hated cars. He studied engineering because his father demanded it. He wanted to be left alone. And when he died of muscular dystrophy in 1956, Enzo didn't grieve privately. He industrialized the loss. He took his son's name, stamped it onto metal, and sold it to strangers at 140 miles per hour. This isn't a story about love or legacy. It's about what happens when grief becomes a business model, and when a family realizes too late that the company doesn't belong to them anymore. It belongs to the buyers, the collectors, the auction houses. And the moment you turn a person into a product, you lose the right to control what that product means. If you're still watching, you already sense something's off about the way we talk about Ferrari. Good. You're exactly where you need to be. Enzo Ferrari was not a car designer. He was a team manager. A tactician. A man who understood that winning wasn't about the fastest car, it was about the most optimized system. He built Scuderia Ferrari in 1929 as a racing team, not a car company. He didn't want to sell road cars. He thought they were distractions. Vulgar compromises. But after World War II, he had no choice. Racing was expensive. Sponsorships were unstable. So he did what every genius with no money does: he sold the dream to finance the mission. The road cars funded the race team. The customers were necessary evils. Walking wallets who got to feel like drivers. And it worked. Ferrari won. Over and over. Le Mans. Formula One. The Mille Miglia. The cars were beautiful, yes, but they were also dangerous, unforgiving, and constantly breaking down. Enzo didn't care. He wasn't building for comfort. He was building for dominance. And dominance requires sacrifice. Drivers died. Mechanics were fired for tiny mistakes. Enzo's own wife, Laura, barely saw him. And his son, Dino, the boy everyone assumed would inherit the empire, was sick. Weak. Fading. Dino was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy as a teenager. It was untreatable. Enzo knew his son was dying, and he responded the only way he knew how: he tried to make him useful. He pushed Dino into engineering. Told him to design a smaller engine. A V6 that could compete with the lighter, cheaper cars from Porsche and Alfa Romeo. Dino obeyed. Not because he loved it. Because refusal wasn't an option in the Ferrari family. Here's the crack in the foundation: Enzo never asked Dino what he wanted. He only asked what Dino could give him. When Dino died in 1956, Enzo locked himself in his office for days. He refused to attend the funeral. Some say it was grief. Others say it was shame, because he'd worked his dying son like an employee. But when he emerged, he didn't soften. He didn't step back. He did the opposite. He announced that the new V6 engine would be called the Dino. That his son's name would live forever in the cars. That this was an honor. A tribute. But here's what he actually did: he turned his son into intellectual property. The Dino 246 launched in 1969. It was smaller, cheaper, and more accessible than any Ferrari before it. It didn't even wear the Ferrari badge at first. Enzo wanted it to be its own brand. But it had the prancing horse in the paperwork. It had the bloodline. And it sold. Thousands of units. It brought in a new generation of buyers. People who couldn't afford a 250 GTO but could stretch for a Dino. People who wanted the story. The tragedy. The romance. They weren't buying engineering. They were buying Enzo's pain, repackaged as aspiration. And Enzo let them. Because by then, he'd discovered something more powerful than racing, the monetization of mythology. If you're starting to feel uncomfortable, that's not an accident. Stay with this. Here's where the structure begins to betray the family. In 1969, Enzo sold 50% of Ferrari to Fiat. He needed the money. Racing was bleeding him dry, and the road car business was too volatile to sustain both. Fiat gave him $11 million and a guarantee: he could keep racing, keep his title, keep his control. On paper, he was still the boss. In reality, he'd just signed over the future. Because Fiat didn't buy Ferrari to make better cars. They bought it to control the brand. And a brand isn't a family. It's a financial instrument. Fiat installed accountants. Efficiency experts. Marketing teams. They looked at the Dino and saw opportunity. A sub-brand. A gateway drug. They looked at Enzo and saw a mascot. An old man in sunglasses who could sell nostalgia while they sold volume. Enzo didn't understand this yet. He still thought he was in charge. He still screamed at engineers. Still refused to meet customers. Still told journalists that his road cars were garbage compared to his race cars. But the power had already shifted. The company didn't need his permission anymore. It needed his image. And here's the cruelest part: the more successful Ferrari became, the less it needed the Ferraris. Enzo's wife, Laura, died in 1978. They'd been estranged for years. His second son, Piero, born from an affair with his longtime mistress, was kept secret for decades because Enzo feared scandal. Piero worked in the company, but without recognition. Without a title. He was the son who existed but didn't. The heir who couldn't inherit, because inheritance implies ownership, and Enzo no longer owned what he'd built. By the 1980s, Ferrari was a corporate asset. Fiat controlled production. Licensing. Distribution. Enzo's name was on the building, but Fiat's lawyers were in the contracts. And when Enzo tried to flex his authority, firing engineers, rejecting designs, Fiat just smiled and waited. Because they knew what he didn't: he was mortal. And the company wasn't. Here's the question nobody asks: what do you actually own when your name is on the product but someone else sets the price? Enzo Ferrari died in 1988. He was 90 years old. Fiat immediately took full control. They expanded production. Launched new models. Turned Ferrari into a luxury conglomerate. The Dino name was revived, discontinued, revived again, not because of engineering, but because of market research. Piero Ferrari kept his 10% stake, a symbolic inheritance that gave him royalties but no power. He couldn't stop production. Couldn't veto designs. Couldn't protect his half-brother's name from becoming a licensing opportunity. In 2015, Fiat spun off Ferrari and took it public. The IPO raised $893 million. The company was valued at $9.8 billion. Piero's stake was suddenly worth close to $1 billion. He was, on paper, unimaginably rich. But he owned no decision-making power. He couldn't walk into the factory and change a single bolt. He was a shareholder. A beneficiary. A man whose last name generated wealth he couldn't control. This is the terminal stage of legacy capitalism. The family becomes a brand asset, not a leadership structure. Today, Ferrari is worth over $70 billion. It sells more than 13,000 cars a year. It has fashion lines. Theme parks. Licensing deals with watchmakers, luggage companies, video game studios. The prancing horse is everywhere. And none, requires a Ferrari to be involved. Piero sits on the board. He attends events. But the company is run by Benedetto Vigna, a physicist and former STMicroelectronics executive who'd never worked in automotive before 2021. He was hired because he understands semiconductors. Electrification. The future. Not because he understands what Enzo wanted. Or what Dino lost. The Dino name, meanwhile, has been resurrected again. Rumor is Ferrari will use it for their first electric vehicle. A quiet, efficient, emissions-free car that goes against everything Enzo believed in. But it doesn't matter what Enzo believed. He's been dead for 36 years. The company has no memory. Only a database. And here's the thing that should terrify anyone building something they want to last: the market doesn't care about your intentions. It cares about your intellectual property. The moment you formalize your legacy, trademark it, incorporate it, sell shares in it, you transfer it from the realm of memory into the realm of asset management. And asset managers optimize for profit, not continuity. If you've made it this far, you're thinking about your own name differently now. That's the point. Let's talk about what this actually means on a structural level. Because this isn't just about Ferrari. It's about every family fortune that tried to become a dynasty and ended up becoming a corporation instead. When Enzo sold to Fiat, he thought he was making a tactical decision. Secure capital. Maintain control. Keep racing. But what he actually did was convert ownership into exposure. He went from owning the thing to owning a percentage of the thing. And percentages are liquid. They can be diluted. Sold. Restructured. A percentage doesn't care who you are. It cares what you're worth. Piero Ferrari's 10% stake is worth a fortune, yes. But it's a passive fortune. He earns dividends. He doesn't make decisions. He can't fire the CEO. Can't block a merger. Can't stop Ferrari from making SUVs or electric crossovers or whatever the market demands next. His wealth is real, but his power is decorative. He's a living trademark. A human authenticity marker. The last Ferrari who proves the brand is still connected to the family, even though the connection is financial, not operational. This is the pivot point most people miss: wealth and control are not the same thing. You can have billions and zero agency. You can be the heir and have less influence than the marketing director. And here's the even darker layer: the richer the brand becomes, the more dangerous it is to oppose it. Because if you're Piero Ferrari and you speak out against the company, if you say the new models betray your father's vision, or the Dino name is being misused, you risk devaluing your own stake. Your wealth is tied to the brand's success. Criticizing the brand criticizes your portfolio. So you stay quiet. You smile at the launches. You play the part. Because the system has aligned your financial interest with your own silence. This is how corporations replace families. Not through hostility. Through incentive design. Let me show you how this works in other contexts, because the pattern is everywhere. When a luxury brand is sold to a conglomerate, Gucci to Kering, Tiffany to LVMH, Balmain to Mehola, the founding family almost always gets a payout and a title. Creative advisor. Brand ambassador. Special consultant. It sounds prestigious. It pays well. But it has no power. The title exists to keep the founder's name attached while removing their ability to interfere. The conglomerate wants the story. The heritage. The mystique. But it doesn't want the drama. The ego. The refusal to adapt to market trends. So they pay the family to be symbols. And the family, seduced by the wealth and exhausted by the operational burden, accepts. They think they're securing the legacy. What they're actually doing is selling the naming rights. Ferrari did this at scale. The name still carries weight. The story still sells cars. But the family is gone from the operations. Dino's name is used whenever the marketing team decides it's useful. Enzo's image is licensing gold. And Piero, the last living Ferrari with a stake, has no ability to say, stop. This isn't what we built. Because it isn't what they built anymore. It's what the market built using their materials. You're probably wondering if there was a better path. There wasn't. Or at least, not one that would have kept Ferrari competitive. Here's the trap: staying private meant staying small. Staying small meant losing to Porsche, Lamborghini, McLaren, brands that took corporate money and scaled. Enzo's choice wasn't between control and sellout. It was between irrelevance and dilution. He chose dilution. And in doing so, he guaranteed that his name would outlive his authority. This is the central tragedy of legacy building in a capitalist system. The only way to make something big enough to last is to make it big enough that you can't control it anymore. Look at what happened to Ford. Henry Ford's grandchildren were muscled out of operational control in the 1970s and 80s. The Ford family still owns a special class of voting shares that gives them 40% of the board's voting power, but they don't run the company day to day. They can't. The business is too complex. Too global. Too dependent on people who know supply chain logistics and trade tariffs, not family history. Look at Walmart. The Walton family is still the richest family in America, but none of them are CEO. They sit on the board. They collect dividends. They exert influence. But they don't stock shelves or negotiate with Chinese manufacturers. The company is too big for heritage. It needs technocrats. And look at Ferrari. The most emotionally powerful car brand in the world. A company that still makes people cry when they see the logo. And it's run by a semiconductor guy who's preparing it for an electric future that Enzo would have called blasphemy. The lesson here isn't that these families failed. It's that success itself is the failure. The more successful the brand, the less it can afford to care about the founder's wishes. If you're still here, you've already started thinking about what you're building, and who it will belong to after you. Let that sit with you. Now let's talk about Dino one more time. Because his story isn't just about exploitation. It's about erasure disguised as honor. When Enzo named the car after his son, he told everyone it was an act of love. A way to keep Dino alive. But what he actually did was replace the person with the product. Dino, the young man, the one who liked music, who struggled with his body, who maybe didn't even want to be an engineer, disappeared. What remained was Dino the engine. Dino the model. Dino the collectible. And here's the unbearable part: nobody alive today knows what Dino Ferrari actually wanted. His voice is gone. His preferences, his dreams, his resentments, erased. All we have is the myth Enzo built. And myths don't have nuance. They have narratives. Clean, sellable narratives. This is what happens when you turn a person into a memorial before asking if they wanted to be remembered that way. Enzo believed he was immortalizing his son. What he actually did was commodify him. He turned private grief into public branding. And once that branding became valuable, it stopped being about Dino entirely. It became about market positioning. Customer acquisition. The emotional texture of the sales pitch. Today, when someone buys a vintage Dino 246, they're not buying Dino Ferrari's legacy. They're buying Enzo's narrative about loss. They're buying the idea that suffering can be beautiful if it's fast enough. And Dino? He's just the name on the metal. A ghost in the machine. A boy who died 70 years ago and has been selling cars ever since. Here's the final mechanism you need to understand. The one that ties all of this together. Legacy isn't something you build. It's something you lose control of the moment you try to protect it. The act of formalizing legacy, naming it, branding it, incorporating it, is the act of surrendering it. Because once it's formal, it's no longer yours. It's a legal entity. An asset. A thing that can be bought, sold, restructured, or reinterpreted by whoever holds the most equity. Enzo wanted Ferrari to mean excellence. Uncompromising speed. The refusal to cater to weakness. But today, Ferrari means luxury. Status. Investment-grade collectibles that sit in climate-controlled garages and appreciate faster than real estate. The company makes SUVs now. The Purosang. A $400,000 family car. Enzo would have spat on it. But the market loves it. Because the market doesn't care what Ferrari was supposed to mean. It cares what Ferrari can be sold as. And this is the ultimate paradox: the stronger the brand, the weaker the founder's ghost. If you've watched this far, you understand something most people refuse to accept: immortality has a price, and the price is meaning. You can live forever as a name. But the name won't mean what you wanted it to mean. It'll mean whatever keeps it profitable. Dino Ferrari is immortal now. His name will outlast all of us. But he's immortal as a product, not a person. And there's no one left alive who can tell you if that's what he would have wanted. Maybe that's the real darkness. Not that we exploit the dead. But that we do it so beautifully, so elegantly, that we call it love. And here's what makes it even more suffocating: the system is self-reinforcing now. Every time a Dino sells at auction for $400,000, it validates the mythology. Every time a journalist writes about Enzo's eternal love for his son, it cements the narrative. Every time Ferrari uses the name for a new model, it refreshes the trademark protection. The story doesn't need to be true anymore. It just needs to be valuable. This is how corporate memory works. It doesn't preserve what happened. It preserves what sells. And once that loop is established, correction becomes impossible. Because who's going to stand up and say, actually, Dino hated this? Piero won't. He's financially incentivized to protect the brand. Historians won't. They don't have access to Dino's private thoughts. Enzo made sure of that. And Ferrari, the company, certainly won't, because the Dino story is worth millions in emotional equity. So the lie, or let's be generous and call it the simplification, becomes permanent. It gets taught in business schools as an example of brilliant branding. It gets romanticized in documentaries. It gets passed down as fact. And with each repetition, the real Dino Ferrari fades a little more, until all that's left is the logo. This isn't unique to Ferrari. It's the endgame of every legacy that becomes a business. The person gets simplified into a founder myth. The complexity gets sanded off. The inconvenient truths get archived in legal files nobody reads. What remains is the version that moves product. And the cruelest part? The family can't even mourn properly. Because mourning would require admitting the brand isn't the person. And admitting that would devalue everything. So they smile at the unveiling ceremonies. They attend the anniversaries. They play their roles in the story they no longer control. Because the alternative, telling the truth, would collapse the only thing they have left, the income stream from a name that doesn't belong to them anymore.